A mountaineer opened her eyes and was terrified to see that she was hanging from a rope face down, 12 meters high in a glacier crevasse. Any extra move could make the rope snap, and she'd die from falling onto the icy ground. The worst thing was that the girl was tied to 3 other rock climbers with her rope, and now she was the one keeping everyone alive by miraculously holding on to the crevasse edge. The mountaineers couldn't get out by themselves, and if a rescue team didn't find out about them and arrive in time, all 4 were doomed to certain death. A lot of extreme enthusiasts don't take Mount Rainier seriously. For them, it's just a decent option for training ascents before tackling more challenging routes. So, what's deadly about this peak? And did the mountaineers in the rope team manage to make it out of the bottomless crevasse? As always, viewer discretion is advised. On June 19, 2012, 5 mountaineers from Waco headed to Mount Rainier, the tallest peak of Washington's Cascade. It towers at almost 4,400 meters over the Pacific Ocean. The person the group had on their minds was Stuart Smith, who had conquered Everest. This photo was taken before they began their trip. In it, the mountaineers are inspired and smiling, unaware of the hell awaiting them. They all had different physical readiness levels, but their goal was the same: to conquer North America's highest peak, Mount Denali. Mount Rainier was supposed to be an easy warm-up before a more serious ascent. However, this mountain isn't as easy as it looks. Each one of over 60 routes requires a helmet, crampons, an ice axe, basic mountaineering experience, and a team of at least 2 climbers. It's just that no one dares to try and conquer this peak alone, without a buddy to look out for them. Mount Rainier is covered with 26 large and deadly glaciers. The mountain is notorious for its unpredictable weather, as at any moment, even in the middle of summer, there can be rain, hail, or snow, which covers the peak all year round. The probability of an avalanche is very high here. According to estimates, since 1887, over 500,000 people have tried to conquer Rainier. Around 200,000 have reached the summit, and approximately 100 have died. However, the 5 mountaineers didn't harbor any anxious thoughts. Full of enthusiasm, they set out on their trip, which was meant to last for about 3 days. Another team of mountaineers who decided to conquer Mount Rainier, albeit via the hardest route, were professional climbers Jim Davidson and Mike Price. They were good friends and stellar professionals, so they chose a route with steep slopes, called Liberty Ridge. Jim was hesitant since he believed his experience and skill were still insignificant for this. Mike convinced him otherwise though, and on June 21, 1992, the men set out on their way. Yet they really should have trusted Jim's bad feeling about the venture. The 5 mountaineers started by heading to the foot of Emmons Glacier, situated around 2,500 meters above sea level. It's the mountain's largest area glacier, covering roughly 11 square kilometers. On the first night, the group passed Camp Sherman and set up camp on the glacier above it. The next morning, the team started their ascent to the top. The way there was very difficult. The rock they were scaling had a 50-degree tilt. One of the mountaineers, Claire Coltgen, started feeling sick, so 2 of her friends helped her get back to the camp and then caught up with the rest of the team. The girl was very upset about this because back then, she didn't even realize that this small failure would save her life. During the 6-hour-long ascent, the group had to dodge crevasses and stay put on the slippery ice, while tied together in one rope team. Jim and Mike's path was even more challenging. They had to spend 3 days scaling an almost vertical slope using ice axes. In this way, they reached almost the very peak at an altitude of 4,389 meters. The 2 friends took this photo and headed back. However, the moment they crossed a glacier at 457 meters, only 1 hour before the end of the route, something horrible happened. In the blink of an eye, snow collapsed under Jim's weight. The 4 other mountaineers also reached the summit and took a lot of photos to remember this. They were supposed to go back all in one rope team, just like during the ascent. They were also going to cross the crackled Emmons Glacier. Suddenly, the foot of Stacy Wren, a girl who was second on the rope team, slipped. Falling, Stacy took the rest of the group with her. They were sliding down on the ice that was hard as a rock, right into the Bergschrund, a narrow and deep glacier crevasse. The climbers needed to act fast, and Van Dyke, one of the 2 men in the rope team, tried to stick an ice axe into the wall to slow down the fall. This might have saved one person, but the 4 mountaineers tied together weighed too much to be held by one ice axe. Van Dyke's attempt ended only with the tool slipping out of his hands and hitting his lip. Noise and screams ensued, followed by silence and darkness. Wren was the first to regain consciousness. She could barely move. The girl put her hand in her mouth to check if all her teeth were in place. The ice nearby had bloodstains. Wren looked down and noticed Stewart, who had been the team's leader. He walked first, but now he was hanging helplessly at the very bottom, completely motionless. The girl thought she'd accidentally hit him while falling and said to herself, I can't believe I've just killed Stewart Smith. Wren started screaming at the top of her lungs, calling him, pinching his skin, and then Smith groaned. He was still alive. Van Dyke was also slowly coming around. He was feeling unbearable pain in his leg. The mountaineer thought he'd broken his hip bone. He let his friends know he was alive, and then everyone realized that Noelle Smith, Stewart's niece, who had been walking behind everyone, was still silent. Was she dead? The girl used to be the last. Now, she was the first from the top. Noelle had fallen into the narrow part of the glacier's crack, while the others had slid into the wider one. Because of this, the girl accidentally got caught in the crevasse and was now something like a counterweight, or an anchor, stopping the others hanging below her from falling. Yet none of the mountaineers would have managed to pull 3 people out of the crack, let alone the petite Noelle. At any point, they could slip off and fall to their deaths at the bottom of the glacier crevasse. Reaching 12 meters in depth, Van Dyke tried to climb up across the ice, using his only intact leg and the ice axe, but failed. Then he got his phone out of his backpack and called 911. Help was dispatched immediately since Claire Colchin had already informed the service about the incident. The girl was very upset about failing the ascent, so she was eagerly waiting for her friends at the base camp. She had been watching her team descend through her binoculars and, awaiting their return, she saw them suddenly disappear. And what happened to Jim and Mike? After falling under the snow surface, they also slipped into a massive crack in the glacier. The climbers took a 24-meter fall and crashed. 2 lifeless bodies were lying on the ledge inside the glacier's crevasse. Suddenly, Jim opened his eyes. He looked around. Mike was lying nearby. He was dead. When they were falling, Mike was trying hard to use the ice axe to hold on to the crevasse's cold walls. And this softened the fall for Jim. Sitting in the dark by his friend's dead body, Jim was blaming himself for everything and didn't know what to do. Out of instinct, he screamed for help despite knowing no one would hear him. The 4 other mountaineers were luckier. A professional mountaineering guide, Peter Ramos, was also descending a route near them. He'd also summited Mount Rainier and was just going back when he saw through his binoculars other climbers get caught in a life-threatening trap. He spent 45 minutes getting to the scene. Using an extra rope, he secured the mountaineers so that they didn't fall before the rescuers arrived. A Chinook helicopter pilot gathered a team of rangers and medics and arrived at the scene in over 2 hours. When he was trying to land the helicopter, the vehicle's rotor blades started throwing ice and snow in all directions, and the shards were hitting the mountaineers like pieces of glass. It was tough to operate the helicopter in the dangerously rarefied air. The pilot was countering the constantly changing wind as best as he could, but its gusts reached 80 kilometers per hour. One of the ranger team's best mountain climbers, Nick Hall, decided to stop wasting time and take a risk. So he reached the glacier using a rope that constantly rocked from side to side. Luckily, he managed, and the other rescuers followed suit. The victims were swiftly taken out of the crevasse. The medics checked their condition and injuries and then put them in sleeping bags. The bags were placed on special stretchers and attached to a helicopter using a rope to take them to Madigan Army Medical Center. Noelle Smith was injured the most, so she was the first to be taken up. Nick Hall was standing on the slope with no safety gear whatsoever and grabbing the stretchers that were lowered back down to save the next climber. However, the strong wind made the stretchers slide downward, taking Nick with it. The ranger frantically hit the ice with his crampons, trying to stop the movement, but started rolling over downward and eventually disappeared somewhere in the snow. The helicopters flew 735 meters down, trying to save Hall. Yet when another ranger landed near him, he said there was no need for emergency medical evacuation anymore. Hall was dead. At the time, the helicopter was running out of fuel and had to go back to the base, despite the mission not being over. In the meantime, the weather was deteriorating and the sun was setting. Were the three mountaineers abandoned to die on the slope? Jim raised his head and realized what a trap he was in. The mountaineer was good at scaling ice, but getting out of this crevasse by scaling 24 meters of a vertical wall required world-class skill, and he'd just survived a painful fall. The mountaineer faced a fatal choice: a slow death or a nearly impossible attempt at climbing out. In an hour, he got a grip on himself and started planning his ascent. He attached a rope to Mike's body in the hope of getting him out later so that his family could bury him properly. Jim knew no rescuer would risk their life trying to recover a dead body out of a bergschrund. He took 5 ice axes and started scaling the ice wall. A chance for survival appeared. But was he one of the 3 people left by a crevasse? Van Dyke curled up into a ball since every second it kept getting colder. He was praying to be taken up aboard. At that point, the climber could hardly raise his eyelids, and he believed he was delirious when he heard a clicking sound. For a second, the man thought it was the hook that attached his sleeping bag to the rope thrown from the helicopter. But then, Van Dyke opened his eyes and saw that he was in mid-air. He was being rescued. Despite the horrible weather, the Rangers decided to take a risk and come get the remaining mountaineers. Van Dyke's sleeping bag was swirling in the strong wind gusts, but the rescuers managed to take him aboard. Stuart Smith was next, and Wren, the least injured of the group, was the last. However, the pilots lost control for a second, and the helicopter lowered dangerously close to the girl and the rescuers. The wind was knocking them off their feet, and they were close to repeating the fate of Nick Hall, who had slid down the slope. Yet, a ranger caught Wren just in time and started waving his arms and screaming for the helicopter to move away immediately. Via radio, he yelled at the pilot for almost tearing their heads off with the helicopter blades. However, it was the weather that didn't allow the helicopter to just stay put in midair. In addition, it was already dark, and the pilot just didn't see where to approach. To avoid complicating the situation, the Rangers decided to send the first 2 victims to the medical center. So, for Wren, the trial still wasn't over. The girl already couldn't feel her fingers and toes, and now she would have to spend another night on this damned mountain. Yet she was accompanied by 2 rangers who were constantly taking care of her condition. The next morning, the girl was happy to wake up alive, but very soon, she heard another piece of bad news. The helicopter couldn't arrive, so she would have to descend from the mountain by herself, albeit with the rangers' help. It was a terrible descent. The girl was barely holding on, and now she was forced to wade through the snow, which was up to her knees, and sometimes she had to balance on the steep, icy slopes. At that moment, Wren, who had wanted to survive so much, was dreaming of dying. The mountaineer was asking the rangers to dig a hole and leave her in it, yet they didn't let her give up. In a few hours, they reached the park headquarters where the girl's family had already been waiting for her. Wren was surprised to find out that the whole world had been watching the rescue. The girl was also told that the ranger who'd helped them out of the crevasse had died while saving their lives. In her own words, since then, Wren hasn't gone a day without thinking of this tragic event. She was constantly reminded of it by a big scar she got from a mountaineering safety belt. Wren went on living with an unpayable debt to Hall, a man she'd never known. But did Jim manage to save himself all alone? The man spent 5 exhausting hours climbing, and he achieved the impossible. He conquered 24 meters of a vertical ice wall with minimal gear. Then he walked until he met 2 mountaineers who helped him. That whole time, he was thinking about his buddy Mike. Since that day, he decided he would live for them both. Jim put his entire story in a book called An Inspirational Story of Friendship and Survival. I've tried to find some information about Mike's body, but it looks like he was never recovered from the crevasse. I've told you these 2 stories that are 20 years apart to show you that time passes, yet mountains like Rainier are ready to take your lives at any moment. So, if you're considering conquering summits, I hope you consider all the risks. Subscribe to my channel to learn about the trouble you can get into so that you can see it coming and save yourself if needed. Take care.